Hi everyone. My name's So I am Milken Scholar, class of 2013. Went to high school in California, Granada Hills. Did my undergrad at Harvard, where I studied history of science with a minor in global health and health policy, and then did a year at Cambridge, England, where I did a master's in, it's like this fancy name, history and philosophy of science and medicine, but really it was just kind of history. And then I started at UCSF in August, and I've been there since. So that's me.
Cool.
Wait a second. I'm Sarah. I'm also 2013. I did my undergrad at Brown, and then I was in the 8-year program, so I can't speak too much about admissions. So I'm still there for med school, but I took a year. I studied sociology, then took a year off to take care of family, and then just kind of worked at Milken, did a bunch of other stuff, and danced. Yeah, but I have really cool classmates that range between 27 to 34 and have done cool things like start their own restaurant. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot of them, were working abroad. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about any of that, but it seems like you can go to med school from a variety of pathways. So
Cool.
Yeah, and I can go next, I guess. So I'm Harleen. I think I know most of you, but I'm a 2011 scholar and from Los Angeles originally, did high school out there and then went to college at USC. I did my undergraduate degree in health promotion and disease prevention. So I took all my pre-med classes, but the degree was more focused on a lot of public policy, some interesting like film classes and how the media influences health, which I really liked. And then I did my master's degree in global medicine and kind of like all the public health concepts we learned in a community level, they let us practice it on an international scale. And then I took 2 years off for a lot of reasons, but I think one of them was I wasn't quite 100% sure I wanted to go to medical school. I got passionate about a lot of different topics while I was in college, and I wanted to kind of take some time before I actually started the application process to confirm I wanted to go to med school. So I spent my first 10 months of my gap years. I was working on some climate change stuff and got to go to Paris and help with the Paris Agreement, which was really cool. And then I spent the rest of the time working in DC and health policy. And now I'm at George Washington University in DC. I'm in my second year. And I think just like what the other two have said, I love it. And there's a ton of students who come from non-traditional backgrounds. I think one of the jokes we always make is that our professors try to put a random fun fact on the board that they don't think anyone will know, but because our classmates have such a diversity of backgrounds, someone always knows. So they'll be like, who is this person? And there'll be some history major who will know the answer. And the professor's like, how did you guys know this random fact? And we're like, to us, it's not random because we've studied this stuff. So we always think that that's kind of funny. But yeah, I think it's cool how med schools are starting to embrace these non-traditional pathways even more. So I think that's really encouraging for students who come from a variety of backgrounds and are passionate about different things.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you all want to introduce yourselves and maybe some of the main questions that you want answered during this session?
Sure, I can go first, I guess. My name is Danny. I'm a 2010 Milken Scholar. I went to Berkeley for my undergrad. I have my degree in French literature. I was able to move to France for 2 years after graduating. I taught English for a little while. I went to the University of Bordeaux for a little while. Ultimately, I felt like that I wasn't pushed enough and that I wanted to pursue my ultimate dream, which was always to be a doctor. I guess before I was really dogged down by the idea that the application process was so long and there's so many years of schooling and blah, blah, blah. But now that I've reconsidered everything, it seems like something that I really want to do. Yeah, and so I'll be taking the Mcat in January and applying in June, and yeah. Some of the main questions that I have are about the application process itself, because I'm sort of like really unfamiliar with that, and like your first year of school, maybe some other like little questions like that.
Yeah, great.
Oh, and also about like maybe the financial aspect of going to medical school. I know like there's a lot of like the myth about like a lot of debt and things like that, and I just wanted to like clarify something.
We will help you on that.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Anyone else?
I can go. Sorry, I really like the music. My name is Kai, and I'm a 2016 Milken Scholar from LA. And I go to Yale. Originally, I studied linguistics, but then I switched to humanities. And then now I'm thinking about doing double major humanity and history of science, history of medicine, which is the major here. And I've been taking classes in history of science, history of medicine, and I'm pretty interested in because we have different tracks. So one of the tracks that I really like is gender, reproduction, and the body. And I'm still thinking about going to med school after this, but I'm pretty sure I have a pretty good idea of what I want to do with the major right now. So some of the questions I have is that first of all, the financial aspect of going to med school, and second of all, I haven't taken a lot of science courses, so what kind of ways or pathways I can do to sort of catch up and get ready for med school, and also from coming from a different discipline in humanities. So if you guys have experience coming from humanities, how do you sort of switch your mindset to go to med school? And I think last, not considered sort of things that I like to know is that what makes you change your mind and go to med school instead of what doing what you did in college in undergrad. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. David, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I was a Milken Scholar class of 2012, and after that I hung out with Hamidah at Harvard for 4 years. And after after Harvard, I went into consulting. So right now I'm working at McKinsey, specializing in healthcare projects. And my main questions for sort of the path to med school is understanding how the admissions process looks different for someone who's out of college for a few years, since I feel like if you're applying straight out of college or close to college, there's a very structured process, at least at Harvard. There's a lot of institutional support there, and there's a defined pathway, and I'm curious as to how the approach might be different for someone who is a little further removed from those structures and that sort of campus support.
I can help you with that, David. There is still more structure than you think, which I found surprising because I also applied after having graduated. So.
Awesome.
I can read Richard's bio because his roommate's asleep. So Richard is a 2018 scholar. He's at UC Berkeley Bioengineering right now. He's thinking about doing a master's degree in translational medicine at UCSF and UC Berkeley. Yeah, so that's Richard. Great. We can start with like the application process first. Maybe you two can talk a little more about that.
Yeah. Well, I guess like I was trying to write down some points that I found really helpful because it sounds like you guys, like I took a couple of years off. And so for me, the way I organized the process was kind of into 3 different parts, which I guess makes sense. So you have your primary application, your secondaries, and then your interviews. And if you are working while you are applying to medical school, like David, I don't know if you've had the conversation with McKinsey yet that you're going to medical school, but I was also working at a healthcare consulting before I went to med school. And so I had the conversation with them. I think I wanted a rec letter from them. So I ended up having the conversation with them kind of early that I was in this application process. And then when it came time to interviews, I just let them know that, you know, over the next few months, I could maybe get like 2 weeks notice and I have to fly somewhere. So please don't staff me on projects where you need me to be somewhere because I'll need that flexibility. So I think just starting to think about your relationship with your employer and how you can best navigate the upcoming like application cycle. And if you're okay being transparent with them, I was really pleasantly surprised at how encouraging they were. I was very nervous when I had the conversation. But I think I just approached it from like, I have really exciting news. I like know what I want to do with my life. And they tended to be more happy for me than upset that I had to ditch all these projects. So hopefully you have someone at your company who you feel comfortable having like a really transparent conversation with and who can help you navigate those conversations. But that's like something that I would think about when you are getting closer to either asking someone for a rec letter from your gap years or you're getting closer to the interview process. In terms of recommendation letters, I definitely found that like when I graduated, because a lot of schools require you to have a recommendation letter from a science professor. So I found that when I graduated, my professors couldn't write, our institution did not allow them to write letters 2 years in advance because I knew I was taking 2 years off. They weren't allowed to write a letter in 2015 if I wasn't applying until 2017. So what I had to do is I would just send out annual like holiday greetings so that they would remember who I was. So if there's professors that you can think back to in college, and if you're in the same area you went to school in, or if you're ever visiting, I would recommend just trying to get coffee with them sometime soon, where maybe you don't have to request the rec letter in that conversation, but you can at least just refresh them and you can bring yourself as a fresh person in their memory, or just do something to be like, hey, I just wanted to reach out and let you know what I've been up to. I find the holidays, and since we're approaching them, are a really good time to do that because it's just like, Happy New Year. This is what I've been up to this year. And I'm just sending this out because it's the holidays and I'm always reflecting on how thankful I am for your mentorship, something along those lines. So it doesn't seem completely random that you're just telling them about your life. And then that way, when you like reach out to them again in a few more months and you're asking for rec letters, they remember who you are. And then on that note with rec letters, if you want to submit your application, like it's a rolling process. So you want to get it in as early as possible. So I would start thinking about requesting rec letters in like March or April, just so you can give your people like months to get them done. But I think that differs based on like your situation. I knew that I was in gap years and I wasn't going to be able to like go back to California and be in their face about writing my rec letter, or I wasn't going to be able to like sit down with them and talk through it. So I just wanted to give like plenty of time for them to forget and me have to remind them. And then I had this whole thing where I accidentally registered too early and I ended up accidentally applying to like the cycle behind me. And so I had to like re-request all of them and be like, I'm so sorry, please submit with this number instead. But it was fine because it was like so ahead of time that happened. And so I would just give yourself like time for any of those hiccups to happen. And then, I guess when it comes to interviews, if you do come from like a different major or, I started interviewing med students this year for people who like want to come into our class next year. And what I have seen like make like really differentiate people is how passionately they can talk about their gap years or their studies and why the difference still makes them passionate about medicine, why like a non-traditional, non-biology, non-chemistry pathway still makes them passionate about being a doctor, and why they think like they can bring a unique perspective to helping patients. So I think as long as you tie everything back to that.
Did she cut out for you guys too?
Yeah. Gross.
Sorry, Harley, frozen.
Harleen, come back.
Okay, I can pick up from where she dropped off, and hopefully she will return to us.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding like the letters of recommendation, like how many letters of recommendations did you procure from what kind of professors? Did you ever get any committee letters? I hear those are really popular.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on the institution you're coming from. So I know from Harvard, we were required to have a committee letter. So we had like this kind of just like this, I don't know, reservoir of letters that we could get from people, and they would on our student dorms would kind of like put it together into a committee letter for us and send it on our behalf. So I think everyone was required to have, I think it's 2 science and 2 non-science minimum. And I think you can have up to, I want to say 6. I would double check those numbers. And so they want at least 1 letter from the sciences and at least 1 letter from the non-sciences. And if you are working after college and things like that, they also like to see a letter from something more recent, so a recent employer and things like that. And so if all the letters are coming into 1 committee letter, Harlan's gone. Okay, hopefully she comes back. If all the letters come into a committee letter, then your institution, it's their role to kind of turn that in and put it together, but they do need a head notice. So a lot of times schools will ask you if you still have a relationship with the medical or healthcare career advisor at your school, they'll kind of like be able to answer those questions better on how that works. Other schools, you kind of like submit every letter as is. Oh, yay, Harleen's back. Hi.
Sorry, guys.
I was just answering, Daniel had a question about rec letters and who you're getting them from, so you can also probably speak to that. I was just saying that some schools require a committee letter where all the letters are put together into 1 big letter, and other schools you have to kind of submit them individually. But I think what a lot of people have told me is to try to get, and just echoing what Harleen says as well, to try to get those letters in as quickly as possible, because I don't think your application is technically complete until all your recommenders have submitted their recommendations. So you don't technically move on to the next stage of getting interviews. I think you do move to getting secondaries. And if Harleen has nothing else to say about the point she's mentioning, I would love to talk you guys through the whole AMCAS process, because it is a beast and I did not know anything about it before I applied. But I'm gonna let Harleen take it away if she has anything else to say, but I kind of think she's frozen again.
Yeah, I think she's frozen again.
Okay, we'll talk about AMCAS then. So, AMCAS, is that what that stands for? American Medical College, something, is how you apply to medical school. And it's this really long application. You can kind of think of it like the Common App. I think that's the closest I can think of what it's like. And in that, you have an area where you're putting in your grades. So your transcripts are really important. You put in okay, Arlene's back maybe. You put in your grades, and you have to calculate your science GPA, which is somewhat different. So they kind of give you a rubric of how to go through your different things. So you have like a science GPA, you have a non-science GPA, and they have different requirements of what classes meet where. And you have all these weird numbers like pop up at the bottom. And when you submit your MCAT, they'll verify those numbers to make sure that everything adds up. There's also a section where you write your activities. So I think there's space for around 12 to 15 activities. And you will state what the activity is, how long you've done it. Sometimes you can write like who the recommender is, and then you will elaborate on what your role in such activity was and what you gained from it potentially. So that's where you can put internships, jobs, you can put publications. If you've done any science publications, you can put volunteering opportunities. Some people also put things they just like to do in their free time. I know a lot of people who will use the box up to talk about their passion for cooking or the passion for cycling and why that's important to them, and why sometimes you can tie that into its medical importance, and also it can just be something about you. So it really is up to you on how you want to use those activity boxes. Then you have a section where it is your primary essay. So that is the essay, which is the basic question is why medicine and why you're interested in medicine. And you're answering that in whatever way you seem fit. A lot of people will tie in things about when they thought medicine clicked for them. People will talk about their passions and how their passions influence medicine. I have a friend who was helping with her essay recently, and her entire essay is about dance and how she's so passionate about dance and how that translates to her passion for medicine. So those are like the big components. Also, your Mcat. So medical schools will see all Mcats taken that were not voided. So if you were to take an Mcat and then void the score, which is what I did, they do not see that. They do see any Mcat for which you have a score for. So if you did not as well at one time, but you did well a second time, or vice versa, they will see both scores. And just so that we're all aware of that, because I do know some people who had some hiccups of taking it once, doing pretty well, not really studying the second time, and taking it again and not doing well at all, and that having hurt them in the process. But now she has to take it a third time, and fingers crossed that she did amazingly. Anything else? I feel like those are the main sections. So it's the activity section, the primary essay, your transcripts or grade. You also need to get your actual transcript sent in from your undergrad, and also any college classes you've taken. So if you've taken any community college, can you void your Mcat score before or after? You can void your Mcat score right after you take the exam. So if you take the exam, you're not feeling confident in how you did, the last question on your exam, because it's all on the computer now, is do you want to void the score or do you want the score graded? And the first time I took my Mcat, I voided the score because I did not feel confident. And med schools do not know about that, but I think you're only allowed to take the Mcat, I think it's 3 times in a year, 5 times in 2 years, 7 times over a lifetime. So it does count as one of your attempts. So it will count as one of my attempts. So I was only technically allowed to take it 2 more times in a given year, but it doesn't count as a score that's shown on my MCAT. So I kind of use it as a dry practice run, which is helpful for me. It's not what I thought I was going to do going into it. But if you can swallow the $400 price tag and use it as a practice exam, then it works. And they won't know. So those are the main areas. Yes, I think. Sarah can correct
definitely, yeah, no, those are it. I think my backup on my MCAS was because of transcripts.
Mm-hmm.
So like, you know, your study abroad, your summer randomly, the community colleges, like guaranteed one of them will be late. So like request those early. Like the e-transcript thing doesn't always work based on like the MCAS, the way they want it formatted. And sometimes when you mail it, like the mail doesn't get there. So just like request all of those as soon as you can.
If you took any like community college classes in high school, all of that counts. Every single college course you have ever taken, as Sarah said, study abroad, places that might have no idea what you're talking about when you're asking for these transcripts, or just know about that and that they will need to get those transcripts at some point in time. So yeah. What was Ty's other question? You never knew your side. I never know my score from the first Untitled. Maybe I did better than the actual one, but I have no idea. And we'll never know.
And then for Kai, in terms of application process, and you said like getting your pre-med recs in, I think something that's really common, especially at Brown, is a post-bac like linkage program. So even if you finish college and you realize you still haven't gotten all your pre-med recs, just like do a post-bac. Like Goucher is a big one that links to Brown, and like I think 5 out of 6 people who applied from Goucher got in. So depending on what med school you want to go to, I don't know if there's a specific one and you haven't finished your recs yet, just like look for their linkage programs. I guess that was the same for David too, or Richard, if you haven't gotten in all your recs.
Yeah. In terms of doing completing your science prereqs in undergrad, it is actually very possible doing it with the humanities or non-science degree. So especially, I think Kai, when you're interested in doing history of science, so in that, actually a lot of my science classes counted towards my degree. Like organic chemistry and lab work and all that counted towards it. But even if it didn't, most of the time humanities majors have less requirements to make it to the degree. So you do have a lot more free time than you think. So I had a lot of friends who did linguistics, friends who did like mythology and things like that, where they had enough room in their schedule to do their pre-med requirements on the side as well, without it being super overwhelming. And my recommendation for that is to not overload on the science. I personally always did one science a semester because more than that was just too much for me. And sometimes I did like 2, but I would also always make sure if I was doing 2, it wasn't like 2 labs as well. I know a lot of people burn themselves out freshman year doing that kind of stuff, but you really do have enough time spread over 4 years or longer if you take longer to finish your degree, which is totally fine, in order for you to just kind of like have the mental space to work on science and also to work on non-science. And I think Daniel's question was about like kind of switching your brain between the two of like science and non-science. And I think for me, it actually, I don't know how much of a switch it is, as much as it is kind of like a break from the other. So I spent a lot of time writing essays. And so when I was doing science things, it was kind of switching to more like key setting and doing problem sets and thinking in a different way, where I found it kind of like a welcome break. And when I got tired of doing problem sets, I would go back to my readings and going back to doing essays, and I found that as a welcome break. So I don't know if that's true for everyone, but I found it kind of like a good balance for me, where I felt like I was using different parts of my brain and different ways of thinking in a way that was pretty complementary. And I think in medical school, while you do a lot of the hardcore science, you also are learning a lot about how to be a good person, which I don't think we emphasize enough in undergrad and how to get into medical school. But I'm learning every day just how important it is to know how to ask people difficult questions in a way that's like empathetic, in a way that makes them feel heard. And I feel like that is a lot of the humanities training that I had, where it was asking deeper questions in a way that is not exactly straightforward, but a way that's really important to learn. So I feel like even in medical school, we are still doing both humanities and science. And I think a lot of my friends who were very traditional science backgrounds had only really done lab work. A lot of the more interactive and discussion-based things are a little bit more difficult for them. So at UCSF, we have these standardized patients who are actors, and we have to go in every Wednesday, and it's super hard. And they just are presenting in a patient waiting room, or like in a doctor's office, and you're pretending to be a doctor, and you ask them what's wrong, and you have to like find out their full history, what's going on, how they feel about not being able to play tennis anymore, or their worries about a heart attack. And I feel like in those situations, I have benefited from having my humanities background, because to me, it's been like a lot of like the ethnographic research I've done, and being able to engage with people in a way that's not just like, okay, so what's your blood pressure reading, but also like, how do you feel about your blood pressure reading being so high, and how can we work together to lower it and stuff like that. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I feel like that was very well said. Thank you.
So Harleen, Hamidah started where you left off, and so I think we're wrapping up on like the application process now. But since we only have 20 minutes, maybe we can jump into like the financial aspect for like 10 minutes, and then like what first year looks like for 10 minutes, coming from non-science backgrounds. But before we move on, Harleen, do you want to add anything else about the application process?
No, I'm sure you guys covered everything. Sorry that my internet decided to reset right now. But yeah, no, it sounded like you guys covered a lot. So yeah.
Can I ask a really quick question?
Yeah.
How was your guys' research and clinical experience? Because I personally, because I'm taking all of my classes at a community college, we don't have a strong research facility and things like that. I was wondering how you gained that experience, if you had any.
People come from a variety of backgrounds. I don't think like you can go in having not shadowed anyone and not really done any lab research or clinical research, and it's fine. I think that was me. I mostly worked on prisoners' health. I spent most of my time in prisons working with people experiencing with homelessness. The research I published wasn't for on PubMed. It was for nonprofits applying for grants, and that's where my research was going. But I can't say I did more than a summer of shadowing before. I think all the sciences and clinical work and research that you'll get in medical school. But coming from I'm not a gunner for I'm not gunning for neurosurgery or dermatology, so maybe it's a little different, where you kind of really need research and want to get into that. So I don't know, maybe Harleen and Hamidah can talk.
Yeah, I would say it really depends on what your goals are. So a really helpful piece of advice someone gave me on the interview trail was he said med school is 97% the same across all med schools. You're going to have your standardized patients, you're going to learn what the heart is, you're going to take the same board exams, you're going to rotate. Med school has to be standardized because we all have to come out as competent physicians. But then there's that 3% that's a little different across each school. That's, what makes the school different. And it just depends what you want to do. So there's a lot of schools that are really research driven in the traditional research sense. And I think if that's something that's really important to you, then maybe over the next year, it's something you think about prioritizing, whether that's reaching out to connections at local hospitals. If you're in LA, I feel like CHLA always has a ton of research opportunities. I know that's where I did my clinical research my last year of school. And I feel like there's always physicians there. I worked in the ED, and they're always just running a bunch of projects, whether it's consenting patients for studies or anything like that. But I honestly went in with very little traditional bench research. The bench research I had was on fairy shrimp biogeography and climate change. So it was how are you applying to med school? It looks like you want to be a marine biologist. And so I think that it's med schools more want to see that you're demonstrating certain competencies and good work ethic and high ethical standards. And I think that you can do that in a lot of ways. But at the same time, if you are going to a school and you look at their application statistics, and every student who goes there has already published 7 papers on PubMed, and that's a school you really want to go to, it's something to consider. But at the same time, I wouldn't count yourself out if you're not there, because I think that there's ways to distinguish yourself that are really valuable and important. And this is coming from obviously I think that half of my med school class had published something on PubMed coming in, but the other half was had done work on sexual violence and other sorts of things that aren't traditional research, but more on the anthro-sociology side.
Yeah, tying into what Harleen and Sarah said, so my wet lab research was on fungi on ladybugs, so it really didn't apply to anything. But I think the bigger question is, have you done research? And I think that is what people want to, that you're passionate about a project or passionate about something. So I had a lot of archival work I was doing, and it's kind of how you sell your story. So it doesn't have to be the traditional biomedical research in a lab setting. But then again, depending on the school, some schools do have different things that they are passionate about. So it may help more to have some kind of clinical project or some kind of lab. I think most pre-med advisors will tell you that you have to do that kind of research, and I will say you don't have to, but I also do think that it is helpful. But I think that what's more important is having a passion for the kind of research you're involved in. In terms of the clinical, I actually had very little clinical practice, and I got caught out for it in one of my interviews. They were just like, "Where's your clinical?" And I was like, "I don't have much." So that is something that I wish I had improved in my own application. So if you do have the opportunity to shadow or to be involved, as I know a lot of people strive as a gap year and just kind of like take on a role of like medical note writing and things like that, I do think it is helpful, and I think it is good exposure. So just take that into consideration. But again, you can get into medical school without having done either.
Cool, thank you.
Richard had a question, I think. I think you're a 2018 scholar, right? And you're a freshman right now. I think you don't need to worry too much about not getting research. I think like a lot of professors are really hesitant about taking on freshmen in their labs. Like even if you do one summer after junior year and then like the summer before med school, if you go in straight, like that's more than enough. Like you will have enough time. Unless, for example, you're applying to Duke, where like they literally do all their preclinicals in 1 year and have one whole year dedicated to research. And if that's your like life goal is to like publish, then like maybe start thinking about research sophomore year. But as a freshman, I'd say like don't really worry about that too much. Like some lab professors, like they like freshmen because they want to be able to train them in the way that they do things. Because if you bring in someone else, they often come in with bad habits from other labs. But like, I don't think you should worry too much about not having enough time. You could start looking sophomore year.
Yeah. And then I think just like one last thing to add is that if you're trying to find research you're passionate about, something someone told me is like, just like search it on PubMed and see what's been published in that area, and then see who the authors are, who the universities are, and like send cold emails, set up calls, and just like hear about like how these people started their research, so that at least they know your name, and if they're looking for someone or if they have any project ideas, and it's something you're interested in, that's like a way to open the door as well.
So we can move on to financial really quickly now. I think all of our financial aid packages will look really different. There aren't really that many like full ride scholarships available, is my understanding. So I guess maybe we can all talk about our own experiences, and then maybe we can give some advice. But for me, my little sister just started college, so we're overlapping the same 4 years. So it was more beneficial for me when I was applying for financial aid to say that my parents are supporting me. I think you can apply as independent, or at least at Brown, or say that you have some parental support, even though my parents are not actually contributing anything. But that means they take your parents' financial information into account. So for me, they gave me around $45,000 in scholarship, which is the max amount that they will give as financial aid to anyone, I think, at Brown. And then the rest, like the $40,000 that I have left, I'm taking out federal direct loans for. So over the next 4 years, I'll have $160,000 in loans. I did hear news recently that like federal loan forgiveness, maybe you two have, or maybe others have more information about this, but federal loan forgiveness was not a thing this year because it was the first time that a group finished their 10 years. And I think out of however many people applied, like only 100 people actually got the loan forgiveness, which is a little scary. So I don't think we could be banking on that now, but I think on average, people come out with 100 to 200,000, and like you will be able to pay that back, is what alumni have told me. Harleen or Hamidah?
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with everything Sarah said. I think there's like no way to sugarcoat it, that med school is not only a huge time commitment, but also a huge financial commitment. I think like David, for instance, like I was a consultant before med school. So it's wild to me to think that coming out of med school, I will be making less as a resident than I was as a consultant before medical school. That's something I always giggle about to myself. But I think it's one of those things where we have financial aid workshops. We're all kind of going through this, we all joke about our loans together, sometimes hysterically, but it's fine. But I think that, I think what I've been told is you'll be able to pay it off, that while you're in school, you're not necessarily collecting interest on. So I had loans from undergrad, so I'm not collecting interest on those loans right now, which is helpful. And at GW, at least, we don't have the option to not include our parents' information, which actually makes things like harder for me. So regardless, like I have classmates who are like in their 40s and they have a family, like their own family, they have kids. But they still have to include their parents' information. And there's like a whole process to get out of it. But even if I got out of it for one of my parents, but it was like a whole process. So just something to consider, that some schools do require you to include your parents' information. But I think other than that, there's ways to get funding for like other things. So I was really lucky, and like a month ago, I got flown to Rome for a conference. And that was all paid for because I was a student. So I think, and then like this summer, I got to do research abroad, and that was all paid for because I was a student. So while the actual tuition is expensive, I think the pro is that because you're a student, there's a lot of other opportunities that you can get to do extracurriculars that will be paid for. Because that was something I was nervous about, was how am I not only going to afford school, but afford other opportunities. But for those, there's often things that can be paid for. And then I think as you're going through med school, something that I wish someone had told me, for instance, is that like the board exams are really expensive. I think that's been something I've been shocked by this year. So like whenever you get to that point, when you take your step 1 exam, like the exam itself is like $600 something. And then all the like prep material can add up to like $1,000, $2,000 really quickly. So just also keeping that in mind when you're budgeting for those times. But yeah, I think just like talking to people and figuring out your budgets, and then figuring out a good payment plan for when you come back is helpful. And if you can find like a private donor who's willing to like give you a private loan that won't collect interest, that's kind of like what I did. So my loans won't collect interest because someone was just nice enough to loan me money. That's also something to consider.
And then for me, I will put in a plug for state schools because I think financials work very differently. So for UCSF, my parents are helping support me, but my tuition is cheaper than my sister who's at Berkeley. So I think yearly my tuition's around, I think 26 to 30,000, which is pretty crazy for med school because I think average med school tuition or like cost of living was around closer to 70 to 90,000. And a lot of state schools, even if you do start as out of state, you can apply for in-state tuition residency within the first year. So like the first year will be out of state and then you can switch to in-state. So I have friends at Ohio State and like Iowa State who are now paying in-state tuition there, and friends who are at UCSF with me who are not from California will start paying in-state tuition next year. So I think considering in-state schools is a really good option. There's also a lot of in-state scholarships. So I know David Griffin, the UCLA school, I think a third of the class is going there for free. NYU, everyone's going there for free in case you're interested. So there are, I wouldn't call them scholarships, but I think financially it does work slightly differently. And then in terms of David's question, loans versus financial aid, honestly don't know the real difference because I think the way the financial aid packages have been presented to me, it's mostly been like a grant of some kind where they're cutting off like 10,000 and then the rest of my financial aid is technically a loan from the school. that you pay back. So right now I haven't taken a loan yet, but I might have to in the future. So I haven't super figured out how that works, but from what I've heard, is you don't accrue interest on it until after you have completed residency for the most part, and then we'll start paying it back. And then I think that's for the school loans. I think for the government loans though, you do start accruing interest earlier, which kind of sucks.
But they don't capitalize.
Yeah. So.
Well, and I think for people who worked for a few years, David, I think they recommend using your savings first because, or you should look at the interest rates because, for example, my loans are 7%. Putting my money anywhere is not going to grow faster than 7%. So I think for people who worked, it's smarter to just use your savings first, and then like push back getting loans as long as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I used my savings my first year because when you apply for financial aid, they look at everything. And so even if like whatever money you have in your savings, they're like, you can pay for med school then. So it actually hurt me my first year in terms of like the amount of like scholarship, like need-based scholarship the school will give you. So now that like I've cleared out all my money that I worked for, the school like is now like making up for that in their own money. So whether like you can figure out how you want to move your money, but you have to report everything. So just something to think about.
Yeah. Also just a plug for Milken money. So we didn't talk about this for application stage, but applications are actually extremely expensive. I think AMCAS primaries and secondaries cost me maybe around $4,000 because I think each school is around like 100 to 120 for a secondary, and you usually apply to around, I think the average is 25 to 30 schools. But if you're a Milken Scholar and you haven't used your 2,000 allocated for grad school, you can use that towards your application / even med school / anything. You just send an email to Janet and she'll just give it to you for whatever you need. So I use that to cover a lot of my flights for interviews and stuff.
Yes. And I think that's a good reminder. So when I was doing my applications, I got a new credit card that I earned airplane miles on. So I paid for all my applications with that credit card, earned miles, and used those miles to pay for all of my interviews. So a way to like double your buck because you're going to be spending a lot of money on it. And like a lot of credit cards have those deals where if you put a bunch of money on it in the first like 30 days, you get like all these miles. So I didn't have to pay for any of my airplane flights because of that. So just something else to think about.
Yeah, and I think Harleen's point on like, for example, borrowing from your parents or borrowing from someone you know who has money is like, there are creative ways to pay for medical school. So basically for David's question, like first the school decides how much scholarship money that they want to give you, meaning you don't have to pay that back. So for example, if total cost is 80, let's say they give me 20 and I don't have to pay that back. I'm now responsible to figuring out like how I'm going to pay the 60,000, and they'll tell me that like I'm eligible for like 40,000 in loans, or yeah, I'm 40,000 in loans. So now I have 20,000 left, and like I don't do not take out private loans. Anything more than 7% or the federal rate is just like absurd because that interest is just going to build ridiculous. Just don't even think about it. Like, be smart with your loans. But what I'm doing is I borrowed 10,000 from my aunt that I'll pay back at 2% interest. And for the rest, I'm actually borrowing from my parents, sort of as like they refinance the house because I don't know, I plan to buy the house from them. So like, I don't know, it's kind of confusing. But in the future, when I'm paying them back, I'm essentially buying the house because they're refinancing for my education right now. So there's just like creative ways to do this. And you can talk about it with your family or like who your connections are who have money so that you don't need to be taking out as many loans. Any other questions? I know it's 5. We can definitely talk about our first year, but if anyone needs to go, they can go. Or if anyone has any pressing questions before they go, please like ask us.
I can
I
also
did have. Oh,
go.
I'm sorry. I did have one quick question just on like the Mcat and just like how you studied for it. Like what study tips would you have? I don't know.
I think having structure really helped me. So I did apply for a Kaplan course, and I didn't find the in-person Kaplan course that helpful, but I did find their study resources helpful. And so what I would do is like read the kind of guidebooks they give you and then do questions. And I think questions are that's where you get bang for your buck, and I didn't do enough of them. Like questions is where it's at. And then AMCAS itself it's kind of like the purple book for the SAT. They like have released questions that you can buy, and it usually comes with a Kaplan subscription if you have a Kaplan subscription. But it's like question banks and practice exams from the people who make the MCAT. So I think
Yeah, I got this.
those are that's like the best thing you can do to like really understand where those questions are coming from and like how to study for them. So that's my
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. I agree with everything just said. And I would just say that because I had taken I took my MCAT 6 months after I graduated. So I didn't take any science classes my senior year. So I had been out of science for a long time, and the MCAT added biochem, and I didn't take biochem even. So I was a little nervous. So I dedicated my first month of studying to content review. And I think that was really helpful to spend a lot of time just getting the content. So Monday to Friday, I would do content and I was working, so it would be a couple hours in the morning and then a couple of hours after work. And I would just kind of space out, this is bio week, this is chemistry week, this is physics week. Or I'd switch up subjects by days if I felt myself getting too tired with them. And then the other thing for me that I really struggled with before med school, but is a lot better now. I had really bad test anxiety, but that's gone away in med school, which is wild to me. But because I knew of that, I took a practice exam every Saturday. So I studied for 8 weeks, and I would take a practice exam every Saturday, and then every Sunday I would review each question. So I do my wrongs, then I do my guesses, and then I do the questions I got right. And then that kind of broke it up, and then I'd go back to content review again. And then the whole last month was practice questions. So yes, I found that really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, I do a practice exam every week, every Saturday as well.
Awesome.
Any other questions? Okay. Do we want to talk about our first, second year experiences really quick? And how transitioning was?
Sure. So I was really nervous transitioning because I didn't have a really strong science background. And I felt that specifically in my first month, where it was a lot of biochem review, a lot of chemistry review, where some people were coming with PhDs, and I really never took a solid chemistry class. So I felt really underprepared then. But what was amazing to find out is once you move to organ systems and everyone's confused. No one has an upper hand over anyone. We're all kind of starting at the same place. So coming to that space has been really nice for me, where now I don't feel left out at all. If anything, sometimes I can understand things quicker than others. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. I don't want to hold up your day. I know that we've officially ended.
Oh, it's no problem. I'm chilling. It's only 2
Cool.
Yeah,
I think you guys have answered all my questions super well. I appreciate all of the time that you guys have put into this. It's really meant a lot.
Yeah, of course. And then if there's any, I know everyone else has to drop, but if you have any other questions as you're studying for the MCAT or filling out your applications in the spring, definitely let us know, or any specific questions on our medical schools. You have our contact info.
Awesome. You guys rock.
Oh.
Okay.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys. Take care.
Bye. It was good seeing you.
Thank you. You too.